And he advocates further NATO expansion, east and south, to expand U.S. control over Middle East energy resources. And there's a technical term for that. It means safeguarding energy security or something like that. What it really means is extending U.S. control over the energy-producing regions, policy goes back to World War II. Jones also advocates, I'm quoting, a NATO response force, which will give this U.S.-run military alliance much more flexible capability to do things rapidly at very long distances. Okay, so go on all the pretexts about defending Western Europe from the Russians. It's now a U.S.-run intervention force to act at long distance, and a very well-armed one, of course. Going on with Jones, well, let's turn to what he says is it will give, the NATO Secretary General, happens to be Dutch, General Sheffer, he informed the meeting of NATO members that I'm quoting, NATO troops have to guard pipelines that transport oil and gas that is directed for the West, and more generally, it has to protect sea routes used by tankers and other crucial infrastructure of the energy system. Okay, so now NATO is a global intervention force that controls the energy systems of the world and their corridors by land and sea through which they reach the people who deserve those resources, rich countries of the West. That presumably includes protecting the projected pipeline that is intended, that's cost billions of dollars, that's intended to deliver natural gas from Central Asia, from Turkmenistan to Pakistan and India. That runs through Afghanistan. It runs through Kandahar province, where the Canadian troops are. And the goal is very explicit. It's described accurately by the Canadian press. The goal is to block a competing pipeline that would bring gas to Pakistan and India from Iran. It's part of the goal. It's part of a longer, broader geostrategic conception of trying to isolate Iran and break its natural connections with India and other neighboring countries, and provide an alternative that would be dominated by the United States. The acceptance of India's nuclear program by Bush, a harsh blow against the Non-Proliferation Treaty, had the same intent. Well, that's the new form of great game. Is there an alternative to Obama's militancy? Yeah, there is. There happens to be a very strong peace movement in Afghanistan. It's calling for an end to violence and a turn towards negotiation among Afghans. Afghans meaning all the Afghans, including the Taliban. They do welcome outside help. They'll have a hard time finding their positions reported here. In fact, you can't. You have to go to the internet, look at writing on the margins. But they're there. They welcome outside help for reconstruction and development, but they want the weapons put down. Even the U.S. press is now beginning to report, not the peace movement, but something. It's reporting that there is substantial Afghan opposition to the U.S. The troop influx. And the Washington Post recently, Pamela Constable, correspondent there, said that the troops pouring into the country, quoting her, are going to face not only the Taliban, but an unarmed but equally daunting public opinion. Afghans, she goes on, say that instead of helping to defeat the insurgents and quell the violence that has engulfed their country, more foreign troops will exacerbate the problem. And she interviews a lot and says that most of those she interviewed said they would prefer a negotiated settlement with the insurgents to an intensified military campaign. And several pointed out that the Taliban fighters are fellow Afghans and Muslims, and that the country has traditionally settled conflicts through community and tribal meetings. Western-run polls indicate that these people could be a considerable majority. A couple of days ago, Monday, there was a report in the New York Times, front page report by a reporter moving in American forces. He mentions that the villages vary from tolerant of the Americans to quietly hostile. Quietly, because openly hostile means your head gets blown off. So they range from tolerant to hostile. On 6 recent patrols along the ridges and the roads, many children waved, a few raised their middle fingers as soldiers passed by, a few others threw stones. But even if they're hostile, it's reflexively taken for granted that we have a right to conquer their territory. And there's a principle that underlies that, covers quite a large range. The principle is that we own the world. So anything we do is okay, and anyone who resists it is a criminal. And that's deeply rooted, so deeply rooted that it's completely invisible, but you see it applied over and over. Well, Afghanistan has a president, Hamid Karzai, who was a media darling not very long ago. He sent a message to Obama as soon as Obama was elected. His first message, apparently unanswered. And he called on Obama to end U.S. airstrikes that risk civilian casualties. No answer. He also informed the UN delegation that he wanted a timetable for withdrawal of foreign forces, meaning U.S. forces. Well, as I say, he had been a media star, but he quickly lost his popularity in Washington and the media. And there now are policies being worked out to try to displace him, to sort of kick him upstairs and put in a proconsul who will do what the U.S. tells him to do. Even in mainstream journals, like, for example, Foreign Affairs, an establishment journal, specialists on the region urge policies that are somewhat similar to those of the unmentionable Afghan peace movement. It also moves towards a regional settlement among all the concerned states. That would include Iran, Pakistan, India, Russia, and China. As they point out, they naturally object to a NATO military base near or at their borders. Iran's role is particularly significant. It has very intimate relations with Afghanistan historically and currently. It's strongly opposed to Taliban. It was very helpful to the United States in expelling them. And it was rewarded by being branded part of the axis of evil and by having its very conciliatory gestures harshly rebuffed. Iran has more interest in a stable, flourishing Afghanistan than any other country, and it also has natural relations with Pakistan, India, Turkey, China, and Russia. And these relations may well develop on their own, perhaps in the growing integrated system that's centered in China as an official organization, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And that's particularly likely if the United States continues to try to isolate Iran and to block its entry into the Western-dominated world. They have somewhere else to turn. They already are observers in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and they move to membership. The U.S. request to be admitted as an observer was denied, and the organization has called for removal of the U.S. troops from anywhere in Central Asia. Well, let's turn to Iran. I should say that the Bush-Obama policy, which is now developing right in front of your eyes, namely invading Afghanistan and extending the war to Pakistan, that goes in a radically different direction, and it's very dangerous. Especially the escalation of the war in Pakistan is even more dangerous to the world. It's putting aside the victims. Well, let's turn to Iran. Obama's policy is, first of all, to maintain the threat of violence. It's called all options are on the table, so nuclear war if we want. The threat of violence is criminal. The United Nations Charter specifically bars the threat or use of force, but in an outlaw state, nobody